You live in the days where change, an undeniable change, is taking place. Don't you? Some of it is tasteful, some of it is distasteful. You live in a world where iniquity is abounding. It's everywhere. Isn't that what Jesus said? Didn't he tell us that? He told us that. And didn't Jesus identify before he went to the cross that these were the last times? Come on now. Didn't he say that? Before he went to the cross, he said, these are the last times. Didn't he say that? So let's get that established, that these are the last times. And in the scope of time, it's only been a few days. You know that. In these last days. It's been a very short time. And many things have happened in this short time. And humanity they have gone through many, many trials, great trials, bitter trials. All the while, Christianity has endured. People have fought the good fight of faith. Many have passed on to be with the Creator. Some to other places. But this process continues. Now, from the beginning, when Christ said these are the last times, to the cross, to this present day, things have lined themselves up according to the Word of God. I was looking at all the geological events that anybody could study, going back to all the records we could find when people kept records. And do you not know that there's been a steady trend of temperature, of earthquakes, of atmospheric anomalies? It's been an uptrend, a steady uptrend, and it began to spike in 1997. Do you know that? It began to spike in 1997. So in other words, you have a line that, say it's at 45 degrees. It's a line that's not straight across, but going up. But in 1997, that trend line took a turn straight up. I mean, nearly straight up. That means since 1997, things have escalated beyond belief. I listened by audio and read the statements of the wise scientists who are watching such things. And everything they said to watch for, everything they said, for example, they said if the temperature goes up on average, I believe it was 0.34 degrees all over the earth, we're going to have an irreversible problem. Do you know that already took place? And if they said further, if the temperature goes up another 1.2 degrees, we're doomed. You know, that's already happened. It already took place. You guys remember that? You remember the statement when they said, hey, if we see global temperatures go up on average, 1.2 degrees, we're in trouble. Correct? It already happened. It already happened. We've been seeing a progressive change in everything, not only geology, but most notably a progressive change in people. In people. Since we were young, everything felt different. Everything looked different. And I know I've said this before, but you guys remember when you could squint your eyes and look at the sun? You remember that? You could squint your eyes and look at the sun. I remember doing that. I could squint my eyes and look at the sun and actually see the sun. You can't do that now. You squint your eyes, it's one big blur. It's because the sun has increased its own intensity a great deal. Do you know that? To the point where people go out in the sunlight, you can barely look up. You can't look up at, looking up at the sky. You can blind yourself. There's a note that the sun would be 7 times brighter when it's all about to end. Do you not realize that the luminance of the sun has gone up in such a way that it's really close to about 6.2 times brighter than what it ever has been? That is one of those, the way you see it things, right? But nevertheless, they're numbers based on real data. I think it's incredible. And we can witness the luminous of the sun because we remember being able to see it. We remember not having the pricklies the last 5 years. Many have gone out in the sun and have reported to doctors a sickness from the sun. Many have reported the pricklies. Many plants are giving a telltale sign that UV is penetrating our atmosphere at an accelerated rate. UV is ultraviolet. It's what bugs see, ultraviolet light. It is incredibly intense. The radiation from the sun, it's emitting that raw heat, energy, power is quite excessive. And still the trend line is still about to take another turn straight up. These are the last times. You're in the last moments of the last times. Once you take all these things into account, like the ocean was somewhat stable for many, many years, still with the storms, but never hurricanes like we have today. They have altered the hurricane measuring specs and those points of data that determine its category. That's been altered several times. In fact, many of these agencies that report earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, as VE scales, hurricanes, right, tornadoes, all those numbers have been adjusted. So that we're not, right, people are not saying we have a hurricane, a category 9. You don't want to say that, right? They keep them within the boundaries of a specific measurement which gives comfort to the people. Now, the people can't perceive a change because if you say, here's a category 3 hurricane, people say, well, we've had those before. Hear me on this. People always say, we've had that before. We've had category 3s, we've had category 2s, we've had category, these categories. But what you may not realize is that the formulas have been adjusted dozens of times to account for the new intensities. A category 4 in 1997 is nothing like a category 4 right now. When you're measuring, very few people can from scratch make a device that can measure wind speeds. Very few people have that ability. In fact, very few people have the ability to make devices and sensors from scratch. And what I mean is winding your own inductors, calculating it just right to do. Those are valuable people. They don't even know how valuable they are. But people can't do that. What do they depend on? They depend on an industry standard that comes from China. And it's digital equipment. So instead of windings, for example, a certain number of windings, just follow me through this nerd topic, a certain number of windings going around a piece of iron, a bar of iron, will create a magnetic field, right, of a certain intensity. You can measure that intensity to see if it matches the windings perfectly. That means you've calculated the size of the wire that you're wrapping, the iron bar, right? The conductance of that iron bar, the conductance of the wire, the resistance of that wire. All these go into a calculation, and then you account for the windings, and you can calculate what that magnetic field should be. It's not the same as 1997 for those who know how to do these things. And we all know since 2002, it was a mandate that everything was digital. There's hardly anything analog left. Everything is digital. And the difference between analog and digital is with analog, it was more of a uncalculated set of electronic waves or responses, whatever you want to call it. Digital is calculated numbers, ones and zeros, that represent a specific natural flow. For example, current, right? To report current by way in digital metrics, you don't measure it the same way you do as an analog circuit. For analog, you simply have a standard meter with wires wrapped around it, and the more current that flows through that wire, right, the higher the magnetic field in the meter moving the needle. Well, with digital, you don't do it that way. There are many calculations that take place. Ultimately, there are differences measured, which turns into ones and zeros, and then they give you an output. Now, sometimes that can be very accurate. Sometimes. Here's a good example between analog and digital. A light bulb, when you turn a light bulb on, right, 50 watt, 60 watt, you turn it on, it gives out a specific luminance based upon the voltage going to it. Not so for digital. Digital, there is no variance in the brightness or dimness of the light. So it turns on at full power, then turns off. Then it turns on, turns off, turns off, turns off. Now, if you do that multiple times per second, you're going to make it dim or you're going to make it bright based upon how many times you pulse that light at full power within a second. See the difference? So everything with digital is very different. It's predetermined. All these Geiger counters, wind meters, all these meters that measure these natural things in the earth, they're all digital, which means they can all be calibrated. Over the internet, they can all be calibrated. Remotely, they can all be calibrated in different ways. Do you guys remember those clocks? The atomic clocks, do you guys remember that? Where you just put a battery in the clock, and the time from that clock would come from somewhere like Colorado. But everybody would have the same time based upon the atomic decay of some, piece of material that they have deep in a mountain. You guys remember that? So you never had to set your own clock. So it picked up a radio signal that was being sent out. That radio signal had data, and the clock would synchronize with that, giving you correct time all over the place. Right? Do you know that same thing happens to your meters when you turn them on? The same thing happens in your car when you turn it on. It's receiving signals from a centralized source that can calibrate every single meter. Every single meter. So then it's calibrated from a base station. That means, suppose the radiation increased on the earth and you have a Geiger counter, a brand new one, a nice one, and it does a good job. See, you'll never know. It's been calibrated over the course of months so that your readings remain the same, but in truth, radiation is increasing. It never reflects on the meter because every meter is calibrated exactly alike. So nobody ever notices the rise in radiation. Now they feel it by way of health. They feel it in many different areas of life. We see it by way of food, but you can never prove it. Why? Because all the meters are digital. All of them are. You guys you're starting to see, some people can see this right now. They're saying, that's right, that's right, that's right. That's right. So the world can never know And it will never know some of these extraordinary changes that have actually taken place in the world. But there's something within you that lets you know something is off. You don't know what's off. Something is off, right? You're in the last times. I'll tell you, they're doing a very good job having everybody believe that things are quite normal. They're doing a good job. A good job. Soon a time will come where they can no longer hide it. Unfortunately, when that time comes, well, that'll be due to an impact, due to an event on earth that nobody can deny, due to an overwhelming, I call it, the match syndrome. You can run around with a box of matches in your pocket, no problem. You can run out in the sun, hot temperatures and everything else, no problem. You can freeze and everything, no problem. But as soon as you strike the match against something abrasive, something that's going to cause some sort of spark, there's always the ignition point of that match. And when it goes, it's really going to go. It's going to explode. That's exactly what will happen to the earth. There'll be no signs. There'll be no signs. It's about to take place. None. But then, just like that match, it's going to scrape something. There'll come a time when the flash point is reached. And when it's reached, nobody can stop it. It'll come without warning. Can you imagine a person walking around? They've got a bunch of stuff in their pocket with a book of matches, but one of the matches had come out. Now for 6 days, 6 days in their jacket or pants or whatever, hopefully they don't wear the pants for 6 days, but in their jacket they have a bunch of junk in their pocket, no big deal. But then one day they sit down in such a way that that match hits another object in their pocket, and then poof. See, there was always a potential of that explosion, but it took the right circumstances to set it off. There was no sign that their pocket was going to catch on fire. There was no indication their pocket was going to catch on fire. So what was there? The ingredients were there. When he first bought the jacket, nothing was in the pocket. The person put all that stuff in their pockets. They caused that potential. It only takes the right circumstances, and that match will go off. And it just so happens that some of the materials in his pocket are flammable. So is the jacket itself. So when it happens, there is no warning. There's no indication. There's only a potential. The elements that can cause the problem are present right now in the world. The elements that can cause what we look at in prophecy are here. They're here, and they can be identified. Isn't that something? We have the tension. We have the tension of people concerning governments all around the world. We have the tension between nations. We have the uncertainty of the races. We have the iniquity that many people fight. The earth and the inhabitants of the earth are in a powder keg. They're in a position where there's no sign, but the potential is here. It only takes a very specific set of circumstances, and that's it. So there'll be no warning. There'll be no additional signs. The potential is here. The sun, we see the potential in the sun. We see the potential with the volcanoes. We see the potential with the water, with the atmosphere, with earthquakes. We see the potential. We know about the potential, and that's the other thing. See, in prophecy, unlike the match in the pocket with prophecy, you are to know the specific things that will take place. Now, most people watch for activity, but I'm telling you to watch for the potential. These potentials had to be known of the people all over the earth. and the potentials are here. They're here. Many will be taken unawares, just like prophecy states. The world will not know. Jesus gave a comparison. He said they knew not till the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be, without an indication. If you trust what you see, that's where you're going to be misled. Look at the potential. It's here. It's here. Remember that. Understand what Jesus said, that these are the last times, and realize that was some 1,000 years ago. That was a few thousand years ago. Now we see and we measure by way of our own lives. For example, we were small. We could peek at the sun. No big deal. You cannot do that these days. There's been a notable change in the brilliance, the luminous of the sun. Many people know about meteorites and meteor showers. They know the potential. Many people know about Mount St. Helens. They know about the eruptions, the various eruptions that have been had on the earth. People have been educated to all these happenings of prophecy. They may not know their prophecy, but they've been educated, and that's very important. Why? Because in the Bible it says, you will see Jerusalem encompassed about with her enemies. You will see the love of many waxing colder and colder. See, the Lord gave us a set of events that we would indeed witness. Have you noticed that? So in other words, just like the guy with a match in his pocket with the other things, we have to know the potential that exists in the pockets. We have to know what items are in his pocket. And we know the items in the world that are going to spark and eventually cause something. We don't know when, but you don't live in a time where it's 1,000 years away. You live in a time where the potential, these items, are present right now. And at any given time, the match could go off. We have nuclear power plants all over the earth. Do you not know what can cause uranium to react without anybody doing anything? Galactic cosmic rays. That means the earth could get a certain wind stream, let's call it a wind stream, of radiation, of particulates and charged particles. They breach the atmosphere, slowly come down to the surface, altering certain properties in uranium rods. The core of a nuclear reactor in that case would go critical within seconds. It doesn't matter if it's submerged underwater or not. It does not matter if cool water is coming in or not. It would overwhelm the ability to cool it. And how do they know that? Because they've already run tests on a small scale with uranium, with all different variants of uranium. And when exposed to certain galactic cosmic rays, there's nothing anybody can do. Now, we just so happen to live in a time where these exotic particulates have been identified. And they have been streaming towards the earth, not in a big way. But see, now something different is happening. Without visual observation, we've had a change in those galactic cosmic rays which come into our solar system. You guys remember that special date I gave one time, August 17th. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back because I don't like doing that. If I get anything right, you better believe it came from the Most High, not me. But on August 17th, when I gave that date, remember I gave that almost a year in advance for the wave to come in. You guys remember that? And when it came in on August 17th, there were explosions in chemical factories. Do you guys remember that? You guys remember? Did anybody ever go back and look at the causes of these explosions? All these explosions happened dealing with chemical. So non-volatile items, you can have two non-volatile items, but if you put them together, they become quite explosive. That's what we face. But in this case, this non-volatile liquid became explosive all by itself without the activator. So the chemistry actually changed and explosions took place. That happened with the wave. So the wave carried these exotic particles. Nobody saw anything. Nobody felt anything. They came through silently, without making a noise. And when they hit, they changed these non-volatile items to very explosive items. Do you not know it's going to happen again? We're not talking about years off. No. But see, they've long since identified what could cause uranium to alter. And you guys know I've been speaking about these nuclear reactors, and I encouraged people to get familiar with Chernobyl, to get very familiar with that. You know what the hope is? The hope is that you'll become acquainted with what happened at Chernobyl to understand these nuclear reactors, to understand nuclear waste, to realize what we're living with, what's on this planet. Many people think that we need some thermonuclear war to really do some damage. No, we don't. One stream of exotic particulates, and it will start a chain reaction that we will regret, and radiation will spew all over the place. Now, according to the Word of God, there are too many. Now, I'm going to just say there are too many places in the Bible that look just like some sort of radiation was introduced. For example, how can it take 7 years to burn weapons? Do you know that's in the Bible, that after a great fight, it will take 7 years to burn weapons? Now listen, people will have special employment. This is in the Bible, that people will be employed, that when they find a body, they'll put a marker up near that body and go on to the next. You know, that only happens if you find irradiated bodies. You cannot pick them up. You know why? If you pick up an irradiated body, you're going to die miserably. The weapons have to be burned because you can't get the radiation out of the weapon. If anybody touches those weapons, they too will die. Now, if you incinerate those weapons and you break down those particulates, the earth can absorb half of them, the other half will go out all over the place. But it's right there in the Bible that special people will be employed. It'll be employment for anybody and everybody, and they'll put on special gear to go out and to put markers everywhere they find a dead body. That weapons are going to be burned for 7 years. The only reason you would burn weapons like that for 7 years, under special circumstances, is if they are irradiated somehow. There's a place in the Bible that gives us strong indications that some sort of radioactive event will take place on this planet. And when you look at the timing of what is taking place, it's bad because there are certain places where nothing will ever inhabit that place ever again. Nothing will. Somebody says roaches will survive. Well, that's actually mythos. They won't survive either. Has been proven wrong. That was good for, Orson Welles. It was good for him, but not true. We've dug up materials that have long since been distributed throughout the earth, where galactic cosmic rays could not reach them. Well, we dug them up and put them on the surface of the planet. Being driven by greed, dreams of grandeur, we dug up exotic elements that should have stayed deep within the earth, and we utilized them. And we cannot put them back deep into the earth again. Maybe Elon Musk will find a way to send all this radioactive material straight into the sun. That would be the best thing to do. But that makes too much sense. So they just store it in a mountain. Whether it be used up, whether it be spent rods, whatever the case is, they are deadly. They're deadly. According to the Word of God, we're going to face some mishaps. That match is going to go off, and that match is going to go off, and it's not going to be known by anybody with precision exactly what took place for that match to go off. People assume it has to be a nuclear war. And I'm telling you, it does not have to be a nuclear war. It doesn't. It could be a simple stream from the sun that can do the exact same thing. That's why the magnetosphere is so important. That's why people watch it with great trepidation, because our magnetosphere has holes in it. The shielding has many holes in it. The sun constantly sends radiation to the earth. Without our shielding, there's nothing stopping those radioactive streams from altering materials on this earth. You do realize that. So if we ever lose our shielding, there does not have to, you guys have to really get this. People talk about CMEs and everything. Let me tell you something. If the sun were half as bright as it is now, and it produced half the solar winds it does now, and everything was cut in half, without our magnetic shielding, we would die in one day. It would alter materials on the earth. It would change the material right before your eyes. All sorts of things would start blowing up. Anybody in the path of the sunlight would die. Any animal, any plant. Any dirt would be vitrified, turned into glass. And that's if everything was cut in half without any solar flares, without any sunspots, no potential CMEs, nothing. Was flowing off the sun every single second of every single day is a deadly stream of solar winds. And the only thing that keeps us from blowing up, from dying on the spot, is the magnetic shielding we have around the earth. If it ever fails, if it hiccups, no one will make it wherever the sunlight hits. And in that case, listen to me, and in that case, people could not even allow the sunlight to touch their skin or touch any part of their bodies. Because if they did, they would be microwaved, cooked, likely exploded, highly irradiated on the spot. And if you know the effects of radiation, imagine without our shielding, sunlight hits a person on the pinky finger. Do you not know that I believe it's calculated within 28 seconds their entire body would be blistered and melting? All cellular structures would break down. And that person would bleed out to death almost immediately, painfully. That's if it hits their pinky. That's how much radiation would go into their pinky. So in that case, if that were to ever happen, there will come a time when we do have holes, because you guys know we're going to hit a point where we have what's called a magnetic flux event. When everything starts to reverse and reorient itself, we're going to have holes. We're going to have a collapse of the magnetic field. The only way to survive that is to go deep into the earth. That's the only way to survive it. There is no other way. None. If you get familiar with Chernobyl, when the firemen got there in Chernobyl and they were fighting the fire, and a guy picked up a piece of irradiated material with gloves on. He picked it up just for a few seconds and dropped it. Within, I believe it was 5 minutes, the pain in his hand was so bad it couldn't even stand. Within 6 minutes, it spread to his upper torso and was going to his lower torso. Within 45 minutes, he was liquefied. Within an hour, he was dead. He was screaming and moaning and groaning the entire time, and nobody could do anything for him. Still, there were others that were exposed to a lot less. These guys had full lead uniforms on, everything else. But see, with radioactive materials, the reason it's so dangerous, it sends highly charged particles out in all directions, traveling at the speed of light. Tiny, tiny bullets going out, and they hit the nucleus of cell structures, causing the cell structure to melt down. So you centrally melt. Your skin doesn't hold your blood. Your blood starts to come out of every orifice in your body. You start bleeding to death. Your skin melts. It's quite painful. It's unbearable. You slowly melt to death. Those potentials are right here. We're in the last times. In the last times.